Coming to you from the M&M Exterior Studio in Nooksville, Virginia, this is Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle, the introvert's extrovert. She talks to people so you don't have to. For now.
Well, I'm excited to be with Athena Scalise Waitt, wellness and success mentor and owner of Wise Oils Wellness. So thank you so much for joining me today, Athena.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to flesh it out with you today.
Definitely. So Athena and I connected because I had written about kind of, my journey with life and what I'm doing and kind of posing the question of, how do we know as we're growing, which direction to go in and how do we know if we need to go after certain, whether it's different jobs or certifications and whatnot. And so we ended up connecting and kind of fleshing that out offline. And what really came out of that was kind of this whole idea is, as we travel through motherhood for a lot of us that are mothers, Athena, you have children that are teenagers, right? College.
Actually, my baby just turned 18 on Sunday is preparing for college. And my eldest daughter is going to be 21 this summer. So I can send her to the ABC store and she'll be a senior in college. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So I'll be an empty nester in the fall. I just cannot believe it's done. We're here.
It's so crazy. Because my daughter's 10 and it's like, I still think of myself as a young mom, a new mom. And it's like, she's 10 and she's young. So she'll be off. Yeah. Boom. Done. So you've had quite the journey. So I would love to dive into that and kind of hear where you're at today, because you've been going through that process of empty nesting one kid, or not empty, that wrong term, but you know what I mean? Launching one and about to launch the other. But tell us a little bit about you first.
So, I have a bit of an exotic background because I worked for NATO over in Italy for 8 years, 2 years in Naples and 6 in Rome. And that's where I met my Scottish husband. And I think we made beautiful babies. My daughters are just a real joy to, experience their growing up. And, but prior to that, I worked for NATO in Rome, and I was working with people from all different NATO countries and Partnership for Peace countries, which were the former Eastern Bloc, and got to boss a lot of generals and ambassadors around. So that was really cool. And prior to that, I worked for a nonprofit coral reef conservation group in Key West, Florida called Reef Relief. And I was their first paid employee as the coordinator for the volunteers and running their education center. And it was a really wonderful experience to work with nonprofits. So those two sides of myself always involved some organization, some planning, some managing people, but also this aspect of working for the greater good. And I do feel very called by that, because when I was growing up in high school and before, when I was younger, like 11, I wanted to be a lawyer for women's rights. And then when I was kind of going through high school, I saw myself maybe going to the Peace Corps or the United Nations. And then I ended up at NATO. So, and then I've always been a big advocate for the environment and for protecting our natural resources. And so all of those things just kind of, for me, it's interesting because I haven't always been super organized about how things come about, but they kind of come about.
Well, it's funny you said that, because I was like, wow, you had like some hardcore goals and then you did these amazing things. So it's funny to hear you then say like, I wasn't super organized with it, like, isn't that funny how our journeys unfold?
I think it's almost like mental vision boarding, because it wasn't like I necessarily mapped it out on a vision board, but I kind of had this pull or this tug towards certain things. And then they came into my life in various ways that, looking back really just now for the first time, I'm seeing that they were manifested, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Well, what I was hearing when you were talking was at a young age, it sounded like you were already connected to your value system. Because, so many people, you get on a track and it's like, well, that's just what I have to do. And then suddenly you wake up in 20 years and you're like, well, I only did all these decisions because that's what others expected of me. And so when you talked about, working for the coral reefs and then in NATO, it's like, hey, wait, those were all tied into your passions when you were younger. So that's like that whole just, at least with me, especially with parenting my kids, like kind of wanting to focus more on, what is it called? Like not the lesson versus the rules, but something like that, where it's like the heart, you want to get to the heart behind everything, not just have them fit into that box. So
you're absolutely right. And I mean, again, this is really for me, an insight just here and now.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'm driven by my values of integrity and authenticity and just a genuine caring for people, for humanity, for our environment. And so everything I do, if I look at it stepping back, is really driven by that passion. And without even realizing it, I'm working now in an arena that allows me to do that in a very meaningful way as well. So yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't really had that moment to reflect.
Yay, I love it. That's my favorite part of fleshing it out because, it's all like, I just, I say a lot, we're better together. And it's like one of those things where you kind of are just, I mean, it's not the best term, but like spitballing ideas, you're throwing stuff out there and you see what resonates. And, a lot of times that's why mentors are so important, coaches, things like that, because it's like they can point out, like when I heard you say that, it was like, oh, that's values driven. That's great. And it's funny because when we're kind of in our own zone, it's like, I don't know why I did that. But then, like you said, you take that step back and you're like, oh yeah, that is part of the journey. And I love that. The mental vision board. I think sometimes I was just talking to someone about that, how like visions boards came about and, it's obviously resonates with some people, not with others. I love that idea too, of the mental vision board too. Just when you tie it to your values, it's there all the time.
It's a guide. It's a kind of a guiding light. And I do have to say, I mean, for myself personally, I have a strong faith and I wasn't really like as proactively involved in my faith until, now it's like it was a while ago, 2006. But I think that I do have to give credit there too, because I have turned a lot over to prayer and and that's part of that, my mental vision board or that internal guide and my values that have, kept me on the straight and narrow.
And that's a big value with having a faith value. You know what I mean? That's kind of part of that pie. So, so what do you think made that big shift for you in your life to kind of lean into that and lean into your faith and be led by that?
It's my children, actually. I think because when they were born, I mean, I grew up Greek Orthodox and I love the traditions and the church and all that, but I didn't feel like a particular personal connection. Maybe it was the way it was taught. Maybe it was the way I grew up in my own home or whatever. But when I had kids, I just didn't want to force feed them something because that's what I did. So I actually started going to a Bible study so I could figure out what I believed and if I believed and why I would believe it. And that was in 2002 when my oldest was 2 and they had a kids program, always a Benny, when you can get your kids in a program and get a few hours break.
Yes.
As a stay-at-home mom. And through that journey in 2006, I had a very personal experience with Christ and began a personal relationship. And that was sandwiched in between, by the way, a stroke in 2005 and breast cancer diagnosis in 2007. So he was definitely in the picture, kind of. And I was very thankful to have, a different perspective on my story, on my journey through that experience based on a more eternal perspective of my life, and also the idea that why shouldn't I go through a challenge when other people are struggling? My mom, she's Greek and very dramatic, and she's like, it should be me, not you. Yeah. And I'm like, why shouldn't it be me? Why am I immune from life's struggles? I shouldn't be. Everybody's got one struggle or another, whether we can see it or not. And if this is my time, it's my time. I just have to prepare, and so it's not martyrdom or anything. It's just it gave me a different perspective, and it allowed me also to witness what I believe to others, and also provide some reassurance, hopefully, that we can get through hard things, but we can't do it alone.
Definitely. And I'm grateful for you for sharing, your story. And I think it's so powerful too, that you kind of, like you said, God was there the whole time, and so, everyone there's so many, different faith walks for different people, and so.
Absolutely. And I'm very respectful, and I honor everybody in whatever they choose to believe and whatever path they're on. Because I think it's just, I think it's really important to just recognize that whether we recognize acknowledge a particular faith or not, that we can't do this alone, even if it's 100%. Relying on community, on friendship, on, a stranger, even that we are not meant to live life alone. And that's really important for me as an extrovert as well.
Yeah, definitely. Same. And you, like you said, when you went through that, I think anyone going through a hard time, I know you and I have talked about your really passion for supporting women, and whether that's through your oils, but, through the journey you've walked. And that's kind of where you and I really connected, at that space where our life experience is enough. Sometimes we get caught up in, am I going down the right path? Is, now that for you, like my girls are leaving school and now it's like, suddenly it's go time. Or, for me, that's how I felt, with my kids getting in school. It was like, okay, well, they're still home. So I shouldn't I got to do something, but not too, it's like almost stressing me out. And it's like, maybe for me, I would say, maybe he's meant to use me right here, right now, and however that translates into someone else's life. But, we keep saying this message of you are enough, you're worthy, just the way you are today. And, when I was
because we live, we're worthy. We don't have to have any other qualification. But, exactly. I was thinking as you were speaking about how our biggest hurdle is comparison, which is the thief of joy. And I think a lot of times we look at other women and we say, oh, well, they're doing this, they're doing that. I must not be good enough, or I must be lacking because I'm not doing 10 million things or whatever. Yeah. And I will say that, in my situation with my health, challenges and stuff, that I felt a lot of times like it was one step forward, 10 steps back. And it takes time to recover financially and physically. For 5 years after treatment, I was struggling with severe fatigue. There were days I just couldn't get out of bed. And I had small children and a husband who was traveling overseas for weeks and months at a time. And I'd wake up and I'd be in tears because I couldn't function. And so, and thankfully I found some resources that have been a game changer for me and allowed me to, overcome that. But my story is different from my next door neighbor or the other woman volunteering at school or whatever. And so I can't say, she's better than me because she's doing 5 million volunteer jobs and I can only handle, just taking care of my kids today or, whatever. And I just think we have to be really kind to ourselves and gentle with ourselves, and have more compassion for ourselves.
Yes. I love that you reminded us of that. The comparison is the thief of joy, because it's so easy to compare and lose sight, of what we're doing and what we're supposed to do. So, I know of other, it's, and I think that's why we constantly need, it's like the path. I was talking to someone the other day about, I did this 6-week meditation, mindfulness. It was like mindfulness yoga, but I did it for pain management because I get migraines. And I still use it to this day when I need to quiet my mind, because she would say, if your mind starts to wander, it's like a child grabbing its, a child wandering off and then grabbing its mother's hand to get back on the path. And that's just like my little, I can hear her voice saying that. And I think like, that's how I feel about communities and why community is so important, a strong community, and faith and things like that. Cause it kind of like helps us get back on that path, when we start to kind of compare and, make ourselves all over the place. We need to
too much in our heads, too much in the world, too much in like the media. All those things can derail us. We have to find ways to ground ourselves and to check in with our true compass.
Yeah. Oh, the true compass. Yes. Our values. Now, as a wellness mentor, and you already mentioned this, but I'd love to dive in further. You talked about when you were diagnosed, because of your perspective shift that you'd had a few years earlier, it sounds like you went into it with, the whole why not me instead of why me. It's the why not me, because it could be anyone. And, whether it's a cancer diagnosis or just any really hard time, because, I've said with 2020, the pandemic has gotten airtime. That's gotten the publicity, of course, as it should. It's a freaking pandemic. But, it's the same storm, but everyone's in different boats. But I keep saying as well, but there's also different storms because you have this pandemic so everyone's talking about the struggles of that. But then you think there's people that are going through cancer treatments on top of pandemic, all this stuff. And then not even physical health challenges. Then there's mental health challenges, family stuff, all this stuff. And it's so easy to get into the why me, especially if you're someone who like tried not to, it's like almost like health, if you've done everything right, you still can get a devastating health diagnosis.
Yeah. I was eating organic and not bringing toxins into my home and I still got a diagnosis. So there are things out of our control.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's almost the harder you try not to, the more you work on something to prevent it from happening. If it happens, it almost feels like that's the biggest recipe for disaster of why me? I did everything right. Why me? So if someone's kind of struggling through that, how did you walk through it? And what kind of insight can you share?
Sure. So, I mean, honestly, I feel like everything that I've done up until the pandemic prepared me to be really in a place of service with the pandemic. I just truly had nothing but gratitude that I've had my journey, as well as all the years of training and experience that I've had through my essential oil business. Done a lot of personal development. I've done trainings on oils, on mental health, on wellness, extensively. And I've been at this since 2011, but honestly, I've been on a wellness journey since I was 12. My mom started serving us alfalfa sprouts and baking her own bread when I was 12. And I was okay with it. My dad and my brother were not okay with, there's like horse food. But, I was introduced at a young age to the idea of being responsible for the choices I make and making choices, right choices versus wrong choices. Either way, there are going to be benefits or consequences. So I feel very grateful that I've had that exposure early on. And it has informed me all through my life and my mothering, my pregnancies. I have one of those, I don't know that I consider myself super crunchy, but I did have home births. My firstborn was born in Rome in a wine vat. Yeah.
Very cool.
Cute story. Yeah. All the names of all the babies who'd been born in that same wine vat were on the outside of it's a big like tub. So I've already been kind of on this path of making choices, being really informing myself about every decision. And that's tiring. And it's, not everybody has the bandwidth. And sometimes I don't even have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
But when it's worth it, it's worth it. Let me tell you, it's priceless. And I think that most people don't invest that time or don't even know that they need to make the time to make choices. And so 2020 came around and I feel like I was very well equipped to help people in the physical realm and the emotional realm And I've already been doing my business online and doing Zooms for years. And it's an online company and everything comes to your home. And, so it was a perfect formula for helping people organically to get some solutions into their hands, right away. But most importantly, I think I really like to approach whoever I work with, whatever issues they have. I like to also approach the emotional realm because emotions drive everything. And we know now more than ever that, our emotional well-being can have physiological impacts. Like a simple example, maybe your migraines might be driven by stress. They could be driven by hormones, right? But also hormones can be driven by stress. Anxiety can cause people to have digestive upset or shortness of breath or whatever. So our emotions have a physical impact. Anybody who says, that has this detachment from their emotions and doesn't understand the physical impact it has is kind of lying to themselves, because there's chemistry involved, our brain chemistry and our hormones and all that affect our well-being, physically and otherwise. So last year, especially in this whole past year, everybody was in fear. The fear was a driving factor, the fear of the unknown, fear of getting the virus, fear of losing their jobs, fear for their families, other members who might be getting sick. And that could manifest in many different ways: difficulty sleeping, lack of appetite, overeating, discomfort. And so I really try to help everybody by also getting them in touch with their emotions. And if we can start looking at affirmations paired with oils, doing some mindfulness, some kind of other things, maybe going to therapy, even medication if it's needed. I'm not against Western or contemporary medicine. I just feel like there's a lot we can do proactively and preventatively before we have to go there. And so if we, or once we get the crisis care we need, there's a lot we can do to help our bodies recover and go back to a sense of balance. So
I love that you brought up crisis care, because I've talked about this. I can't remember if I've talked about it on the podcast or not, but I remember talking to a friend, and I was, struggling with, I was in the midst of my migraines and my stuff. And it was one of those, well, I know when I do everything right, because of course I'm like an inner rule follower, that I have to break free of kind of thinking that that's going to lead to success.
I'm a rule follower too. And I kind of like it, but
there's pros and cons to it all, but
makes me a little square.
Well, it's funny. I'm like, I don't mind the gray area, but it's kind of sometimes was thinking, I remember saying, if I do everything right, I know that I can feel better. When I eat right and I do this and I do that and I do all the things, so I don't need to worry about taking an extra step or, medication and things like that. Cause I was struggling. And even though it ended up being for my migraines to help, I still was in this hamster wheel of, it's almost like chicken or the egg, and I kept going around, with her kind of sharing my stress of, I don't want to take any extra measures, because if I just did everything right, when like I have in the past, this wouldn't be a problem. And I just remember she said something kind of like, but that's a lot of pressure on you. And you're, if you're at a place where you can't do that, and that's a lot of pressure to have to be perfect to enable to have good mental health, basically. And so I was glad you said crisis care, because the way I've shared with some people is I felt like I was in a mud pit, and I kept trying to climb out, and I was trying to do everything right, everything to the best of my ability, but I just kept sliding in, and I needed that rope, and that rope helped pull me out so that I could start doing the things kind of quotes, knew I needed to do. And so, because that's why I love guests like you and other guests who expose people to alternative ways to think or to heal or to cope and all this other stuff. but I just always love kind of reminding that it's all part of that bigger pie, you know,
It's
and that
true.
it's not one way or the highway type thinking.
Absolutely.
So.
And that's very much part of my philosophy. It's like, yes, oils are a tool, and we're an essential oil company, but we also have other products that are very clean and helpful. But, you know, nutrition is important. It's a foundational principle. Getting our heads screwed on straight, and we sometimes need help, whether it be a therapist or medication or whatever. You know, it all serves but again, we have to, as much as we can, be proactively involved in the solutions. And I think the biggest challenge for me when I work with people is when they want someone to fix them, but they're not ready to work on themselves. And I will bless them. I will try to do whatever I can, but I can't. And people have to own their health. They have to own the outcome, and they have to want to really get out of whatever mud pit they're in to, you know, have different results.
I think that's why the mental health / self-care part is so important. And by self-care, I mean mental self-care, because when you said they have to want it, I've read stuff and also asked myself this. It's like, are we identifying more with the pain? You know, what are we getting from this hardship?
Absolutely. And sometimes it is our identity to be the person who has this or that going on. Even in the cancer community, there are people who I'll be in May, it'll be 14 years since I was diagnosed.
Oh, that's great.
And, you know, and some people choose to kind of still have that very prominent identity in their cancer, but I don't want cancer to rule my life. You know, yes, it's a part of my story, but it's not who I am. And so I'm actually on the board of the Barnett Searing National Cancer Foundation. And, you know, I do walks and do whatever I can to support the community. But for me personally, it's not the hat I choose to wear on a daily basis as being a cancer. I call it thriver. I'm a thriver. I don't want to be called a survivor, because that's just the minimum on the bar for me.
Yeah.
But to what you were saying, is that's why I feel the emotional part is so important. If we don't get to those root emotions, and a lot of times those root emotions are really subtle, like I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm unloved, I'm not perfect, or whatever. If we can help with those, it starts to unfold opportunities to start doing the self-care, to start being open to solutions and being more loving with ourselves to actually do them. It's hard to, and honestly, I'm not preaching to anybody, because when someone's in a deep depression or in deep, severe anxiety, you know, there's no judgment there. If they can't even, you know, function, telling them to, you know, do anything, it is hard to ask. You know, they need more serious attention. And that's why the critical, you know, the crisis piece is really important. Sometimes people just need something like immediate that can help stop the spiral, and then they can get on with the other ways to support themselves. And sometimes it can be the thing that helps, you know, it can be smelling an oil can take them out of a spiral. So everybody's different, and everybody's on their own path, you know.
But like you said, it's the emotional well-being is really at the core. And that's, for me, I feel like what I learned in season 1 of the podcast. You know, so many of my guests, you know, Christina Ammerman in particular, she talked about the core wounds, and you know, she talks a lot about how it comes down to being unworthy and unloved. Those are the two kind of core wounds that people have. And, you know, it's one of those things when we first talked about it, it was like, okay, that's interesting. All right. And then, you know, as I've talked to more people and peeled back more layers on myself and talking to others, it's like, oh my gosh, it really all comes down to that. And if we kind of don't heal, and you know, there's lots of different things people are struggling with, but if we don't peel it back the layers, it's like putting, you know, just a Band-Aid on a, you know, 3-inch deep wound. Like that, a little Band-Aid's not going to do anything. You can keep slapping that Band-Aid on, but until you actually get in there, it's just
Well,
gonna.
actually, 2020 was the big rip off the Band-Aid moment for our whole globe, our whole society. I think there were a lot of things that it ripped the Band-Aid off of,
What do you mean by that?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
the racial crisis, political crisis, our healthcare crisis, all the things that I think were there, but nobody was really addressing.
Bubbling under the surface.
Yes. Boy, did they boil over last year. And so, the other thing, I just mentioning the worthiness thing, I just finished listening to Brene Brown's Men and Women and Worthiness. Wow. What a book. Fabulous book. And what she says it all boils down to is shame.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
It's that core emotion, that core feeling that just kind of we live with, or we have to navigate, you call it core wounds, but so it was very good. Very good. Yeah.
That's the, cornerstone of the podcast and everything. And it's kind of what keeps me sharing, even when I started to say, oh yeah, when I was going through that hard time, I had this in my head, it was like, oh, do I want to share this? I kind of start going through, my own stuff. And then it comes down to, well, I think about that person, and so it could be anyone listening, but who's in that, who feels like they're in that mud pit, and like you said, it's like, you can't, there's a quote, it's actually from a book, like a Christian themed book. It says, and actually I think it's a Psalm, or a proverb, not to sing songs to a heavy heart. And I just really connected with that because I think, we live, especially when you're in an entrepreneurial world, in a business world, direct sale world, all those things, there's so much positivity, motivation,
Don't they call that toxic positivity now? That's a whole new
positivity. Love it. I just touched on that on another episode too. And I'm like loving though that they're doing that because yes, good vibes are wonderful. And that's the whole thing with emotional. It's like having, but to get to that good place, sometimes you have to go to the dark, hard stuff. I mean, you
can't dismiss it. You can't pretend it's not there. Oh, exactly. I'm just going to think positive and it's going to go away. It's not, that doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's a journey and it's a process and it can get messy and uncomfortable, but the outcome is worth it. And I think what it makes me think about is how I got to where I'm at. And, I had a lot of self-doubt and I still struggle with that sometimes about, am I in the right place? Am I doing the right thing? Do people take me seriously? Am I qualified enough? All those questions. But I think what you mentioned that you pulled out in the very beginning, am I living in my values? And I can say yes.
Yeah.
And my core words are, actually my word of the year this year is purpose.
Oh.
But the words that drive my bus are integrity and authenticity. And so am I living that way? I can say yes. And whether I'm baking cookies or educating people about oils or whatever I'm doing, as long as I'm doing with those foundations, then I feel like I'm enough.
Yeah. And you are, like you said, just being. And the thing is too, is that, and for, we've talked about faith, like the right people will be in your life because we're not going to be for everyone. That's like a thing I keep telling myself,
yes.
is the recovering people pleaser is we're not for everyone. And that's why it comes down to, if you're living with integrity, being true to yourself, being guided by your values, then, the things that come up, if it's not meant for us, it'll go. And if we keep moving forward in those values and integrity. So
true. Cause I recently had a situation that just really floored me for 24 hours. And then I just realized, it's not me. And it's just, not that I'm perfect. I'm not, I could pretend I am, but I'm not, and I make mistakes and I do stupid things. Yeah. But in this instance, it was totally unwarranted. And, and after I kind of licked my wounds, I was like, wait a minute, how come I gave up my power to somebody who, isn't my people. And so it was a good reminder for me.
Yeah.
And also, once I kind of said, I'm going to let go of this and move forward, lots of great things happened, so also releasing that negativity, releasing this negative self-talk, or any kind of pity party.
But you worked through it. That's the whole thing. Is you didn't just say, "Oh, no, positive vibes only." You kind of said, "Ooh, what is this?" And
I wallowed for 24 to 36 hours. I wrote out my feelings. I talked to some people, and I prayed about it. And then I kind of was like, I know in my heart of hearts that what I'm doing provides a service to people, and I see the value in it. And nobody is going to rob me of that joy and that sense of purpose.
Definitely. And that goes back to what you said about Brene Brown and how everything at the core is shame. And the reason I kind of went back there is on a recent episode with Tina Unruh. We talked about how basically everything we do is about us, and not in a self-centered way, but meaning any reaction we have to someone, it all is born from within us. Like, why did someone react the way they did to me? So we automatically think, oh, if they reacted like that to me, about me, and they're saying this stuff about me, obviously this is about me. But it's like, no, you just triggered whatever stuff is in them. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take constructive criticism and things like that. Of course not.
Yeah.
But that goes back to why we need mentors and truth tellers in our life. But it's like the older I'm getting now, the more life experience, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so true. It is. It's our own stuff. And how often are we getting dumped on because of other people's unresolved pain and trauma and shame? And then it's affecting us and doubting our path in life and who you're meant to, encourage and support and carry through life, because it's like we're all just dumping trauma,
it's true.
It out.
It's so true. I mean, even within our own families, there's a lot of that, that happened as we're growing up and whatever. But it's kind of like I want to go back to my younger self and say, hey, you're enough. You don't need anybody's permission or approval. And sadly, especially I think as women and mothers, young mothers, we just often have so much self-doubt and so much self-criticism. And then it steals the joy of our experiences.
Yeah. And
with our children, with ourselves, with our families.
And there's so much comparison in that world, you're just constantly, and then you get older and you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, it wasn't even about that.
Well, you can see why these older ladies say, when I get old, I'm going to wear purple. It's like, yeah, I'll do whatever the hell I want. I'm not going to do it by everybody else's rules anymore. But as women, I think, and I'm hoping the next generations, like my daughters and your daughter, we are able to break away from those stereotypes and those expectations and those norms that really kind of shaped women up, I think, at least through my generation, to be a certain way, to behave a certain way, to think a certain way, to conform a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And not always just by men, by older women who kind of want to put you in line because this is how it's been done. So I think if I had anything to say is that it's never too late to start being yourself.
Yay. So true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And that's, I think it's a great way to wrap it up, because when we're on our journey, I feel like, the best thing when we work on ourselves, we naturally help others. Like when we're the best, when we're the best we or whatever. And I think as mothers too, especially, is that it's leading by example, because they see us, we can say one thing, but if we do another. And I'm really curious, like you said, what will it be like? Your daughters are adults now, and my kids are up and coming. And so there's more people like you sharing your story, sharing your thoughts. I think that's why there's so much power in sharing our stories and our journeys, because if the younger kids hear this, more often, and it becomes the norm, and it takes over kind of the stories of, you need to fall in line, you need to follow this path, you need to follow your path. So
yeah, my daughters keep schooling me every day, and I'm just so proud of them for having a whole different future, and I don't blame anybody, because this is, we're evolving, and thankfully they're evolving as women to have a whole different kind of perspective and language and expectation of the world. So I'm really excited for their future.
That's awesome. Past guest Dawn Gishiers talked about our kids are our greatest teachers, and and our kids, as they get older, just continue to keep teaching us, and it's shifting that perspective. Instead of us needing to be the ones to teach them, we guide them and help them, and but that it's a two-way street. It's not
so
just
true.
one way.
So true. I think there's a big transition as a parent. I know we're wrapping it up, but as a parent is to move out of the disciplinarian role into more of collaborative parenting, and also then moving into a position of being humble enough to understand that our children can teach us things, and we don't have all the answers,
That is some wisdom right there.
It's been a real journey, and I'm just so glad to kind of be on the other side of the transition, because it was challenging, but worth it.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And I think once again, that kind of goes back to why it's so important to have friends and mentors and just voices kind of helping us navigate, because it's so easy to kind of just get locked in on your path. And so, Athena, I thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom today. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
So I have a website. It's wiseoilswellness.com. I'm also on Facebook as the same name, or at Wise Oils on Instagram. And you can also just email me, mywiseoils@gmail.com. And, I really am thankful to be here, and I'm happy to help any way I can in your community. So thank you so much. This has been great. I got some real aha moments out of this.
And that's a wrap for now.
Thanks for listening to Flushing It Out with Samantha Spittle. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and rate us on iTunes. For all things Flushing, visit our website at flushingitout.com. This has been a Spitfire production.
That was the greatest thing I've ever heard.